If you've got one product, take the single most important question that you know your customers might be asking and run it through 3 AI models without naming your business. Ask each one of them to name the sources, the data it's actually relied on, and tell you not to justify itself. Be honest about why it's used that data, and then map out what the fixes are. You're going to get a couple of nuggets from there that are going to really help move the needle. I'm Claudia Constantin, and this is SEO in 2026 Additional Insights.
Claudia, what's your number one SEO tip for 2026?
My number one tip is that you don't have to figure out how to show up in AI search by trial and error. You can get the AI to tell you directly. So the way this works is you ask the AI the same questions your customers would, and the things they actually type when they're looking for what you've got to offer. You then see how you show up, and if you show up at all. And instead of just stopping at that answer, you treat it as a diagnostic tool and you interrogate it. What did you base that on? Which sources did you use? If the business didn't appear, why did it not appear? And essentially, that's your fix. You get it straight from the source. So rather than trying to reverse engineer AI, you ask it a real customer query and then interrogate the answer. And the answer is going to give you the starting point.
Brilliant advice. And if you ask AI the question, why didn't this business appear? And what are maybe some typical answers it may give to that question?
So sometimes it could say that it was one of the things that it found. However, it wasn't as strong as the other businesses. It didn't come up in third-party reviews. It wasn't cited anywhere else. So it had weaker signals, and hence it wasn't one of the choices for the model. Because if you do interrogate, it will tell you what sources it's used, how it's basically analyzed the data, and if it even did a live search or it based its response on the training data.
And if it was one of the weaker signals, do you also ask it the question, how do you get this business to be one of the stronger signals?
Yeah, definitely. That's the whole point of it, using it as a diagnostic and asking it directly, what can I do better for it? But what's really important here is to keep it as clear as possible. So be it in a new account where it's not contaminated by other information that might have been pulled in other queries, where it doesn't have any information about your business, and to try to look at it from different angles. So not do one question and then you're done. Look at different models as well, because they all appear differently. If there's one thing I would say is I would use the free models, because I'm thinking from a consumer perspective. Consumers are not going to be paying for AI to have a paid subscription to ChatGPT or Claude or whatever. They're going to be using the free models. So those are the ones where you really want to know how you appear, because changing models will actually give you different responses, and it will use a different methodology for doing the search sometimes.
And what answers are you typically seeing when you're asking the question, what can I do to become one of the number one recommendations for this particular sector?
The biggest thing is the information that you've got on your website. So for anyone saying content is going to go down or anything like that, actually, no, it's going to be so much more important, but it's going to be important in terms of how it's structured on the page. The AI models tend to go to the source, but when they don't have the source, then they'll obviously look at the wider picture. Because if you're asking what's the best brand for trainers, if I'm just starting to do running, and you don't give it an indication of a specific brand, then it's going to give you different things. But if you're interrogating it and you're trying to find out what's the information out there for a specific business, then it's going to go and dig a bit deeper. So it does really depend on how you ask the questions. That's the most important thing I would say. Is just very, very important to not guide the model to a specific business, because then you can start seeing. But when my audits is things like what they have on their website, they didn't have enough information on the website, not enough being cited on other websites, not necessarily backlinks, but being mentioned is really important. Not having reviews, not having good schema markup on the website. That's a big one for my own business, for Switchity, where because we're a comparison website, it's a very competitive space and we're a very small business and we're competing against USwitch and to compare the market. These are very big players. So I needed to find out a different strategy. And what I noticed while doing these interrogation is that the model kept picking up on my location. So it kept picking up that I'm in Solihull. And I thought, oh, okay, that's interesting. That means that there's some space there if I do specific location pages where I could actually maybe appear above or maybe appear within the citations. Did everything right, did the location page, schema markup, everything as you would. But it was still not appearing like I would have wanted to. And then when I interrogated more, it was the type of schema. I was missing a specific type of schema that was very important. The item list one that allowed me to put the deals and to have everything tagged correctly on there. Because it's very, very important for the AIs is for you to tell them exactly this is the answer.
And you also talked about using the consumer version of AI search. So not being logged in yourself, not having a paid version. How do you ensure that the conversations that you're having with AI aren't skewed by conversations that you had in the past, or perhaps a computer or IP address that you happen to be using?
Well, that's what I do. I'll have an account that I'll actually open up when I do a new search like this. So when I want to have something that's really clean, I don't want any interference from anywhere, I'll have an email address. I'll open a new ChatGPT account, fresh, nothing in there. For Gemini, you just go in incognito. For Claude, the same. You can just create a new account and do the interrogations there.
How do you measure the volume of opportunities? Because a lot of people interact with AI in very bespoke ways, and you're not necessarily sure how many other people are actually communicating with AI like that. So if you've perhaps identified a particular phrase that you're using to see if your business is uncovered for that particular query, how do you know there is a volume of opportunity for that?
The way I've looked at it is I'm still looking at traditional SEO. I'm still looking at what is it that is needed on the market. What does the market look like? Then I go and look like, what does my business look like? What do competitors look like? And then the AI is essentially just another layer on top of that. I'm not changing anything of what I've been doing. I've just added a layer of diagnostics and going very targeted as to the specific things that I found through AI that I was missing on the website. So it hasn't, from my opinion, moved from that. You're still looking at the same queries, but people are just going into a lot more detail. So you still have to have the answers to the same sort of things you had before. You're just structuring them differently. You make sure that you've got FAQs now, because that's how people ask. They're not going to go short questions. So if the AI identifies a question that's being asked there, you've got it a very good answer on your website, it's got the right schema markup on it, then the likelihood is that you'll be cited in that. It's not a guarantee. None of this is a guarantee. But I've seen it with Switchity. So in the space of less than a week from adding the item list schema markup on it and being really detailed, we've started appearing in the AI overview in ChatGPT, Claude, Gemini, everywhere. Claude and Gemini more, it's a bit more difficult from what I've seen, but ChatGPT, we're all over the place, Google AI overview, which is quite interesting because Gemini and Google AI are the same, you would think, but they do still have different answers and they do still behave a little bit differently when you start looking into this like day in and day out.
Where else, if anywhere, does AI fit into your process? So, for example, do you use maybe an AI agent to help you to automate the querying of whether or not there are missing opportunities on your website? And do you use AI to actually produce content or schema markup in order to correct what you've got already?
So I do use AI quite a lot in terms of research. That's a big one. Yes, I do use it to create some of the content, but it's all edited by me. It's all double checked. I go through every single bit that's on the website. I use it if I do want to automate any of the content. But again, like I said, it does still go through a very rigorous process before it gets put on the website. What else? I use it for quite a bit. Analysis as well, even competitor analysis. How do they appear? Because I want to see what they're doing really well as opposed to what I'm doing. And is there a gap there, or is there an opportunity, like it was with the location pages that I mentioned? So yeah, I do use it quite a lot. I find it a really useful tool in being able to do so much schema markup as well. It helped in order to be able to just find out the different types of schema markup. I mean, there are hundreds of them. It's really hard to kind of know off the top of your head which ones to add. So this kind of cuts all of that work of going through absolutely everything. It helps with writing the schema markup as well. So you can write the code with that and then you can add it to your website. So it makes it very, very easy to implement as opposed to what it was a few years ago.
And there are probably hundreds of different models out there as well, because I mean, obviously you've got things like Claude, Gemini, ChatGPT, but you've got loads of models within there as well. And you mentioned you go for a relatively simplistic model when identifying or interacting with AI on behalf of a consumer to see what exists. How do you identify which platform and model to use? Because obviously you can't test every single model, can you?
Well, I use 5 models when I do this actually, because I do want to see the cross-reference between them. That is actually a very important point. ChatGPT tends to pull information from Bing, and obviously the training model, the data that they've got in there, but Claude works a little bit differently. Perplexity works a little bit differently. They all work a little bit differently. And ChatGPT, for example, when I started doing AI audits, because I haven't only done it for Switchity, I do it for other businesses as well. So I've done quite a few of these over the last year and a half. When I've first started doing it on ChatGPT, for example, every single question that I asked, it did a live search. It doesn't do that today. It doesn't do a live search if, for example, it's a question about tell me what you know about this business, because from my conversation with it, like I interrogate it all the time. And whatever conversation I have with AI, it's even told me that it's not experienced that with anyone else, because I go to the extreme. I really want to know why it's giving me those answers. So there is always a crossover between them. There is one nugget at least that you can find when you go over. So you take a question and you put it in a model, you interrogate it as to why it's giving you those answers. You go to another platform, you ask it the same question, ask it the same set of questions, of interrogation questions. So you don't have to necessarily get creative every time, and do it across the 5 models. Because yes, when I do these questions, I do it on the base model, but then when I do the analysis of it, I take all that data that I have and I put it in Claude. And I ask Claude, okay, can you extract from these 5 models, from the answers, what are the most important things? What are the things that have come across consistently over platforms? What are the things that don't actually align either? Are there things that don't align? And what are the differences? So you would have to analyze that data, because it is quite a bit of it. But the beauty does come in when you can see it from different models, because you can then take it in order. If you do it properly, you can have a plan to work on for the next year off the back of this.
Another phrase that you come up with is the content bar didn't rise, it split. What does that mean?
So basically, it means that content that is written with AI that has no value, that is just basically the same thing regurgitated over and over again by everybody, is just not going to rank well anymore. Simple as. But content that is personalized, that is based on businesses' data and information and actual things that they've done, is going to become more valuable. And that's the kind of thing that AI wants to see, that Google wants to see, is things that are extremely helpful to the user, that are unique from that business perspective, not just the same generic thing.
And another phrase that uses interrogation turns AI visibility from guesswork into evidence. What does that mean?
So basically, rather than kind of going, oh, I need schema markup, I need this, I need that, you basically go and ask it, like I said earlier. And the best example I have is what I did with Switchity, where I built those location pages, I did the schema markup on it. As far as from an SEO perspective, I could have been like, well, everything's done perfectly there. I've done what I needed to do. But because I kept interrogating it and found out about the item list schema, about how detailed I could potentially go with this, and then applied it, I saw a huge shift. And it wasn't guesswork. And I could go back over something that I actually thought I did well and correct myself or add more or learn something new.
Claudia, what's the key takeaway from the tip you shared today?
So basically, the key takeaway from the tip that I shared today is that if you've got one product, take the single most important question that you know your customers might be asking and run it through 3 AI models without naming your business. Ask each one of them to name the sources, the data it's actually relied on, and tell you not to justify itself. Be honest about why it's used that data, and then map out what the fixes are. You're going to get a couple of nuggets from there that are going to really help move the needle.
Claudia Constantin is co-founder and head of SEO at Switchity. Find out more over at switchity.co.uk. Claudia, thanks so much for being part of SEO in 2026.
Thank you so much for having me, David. It's been a pleasure.
I've been your host, David Bain. Get your copy of SEO in 2026, the book, over at seoin2026.com.